Hello, I'm Seungin Ryu. I will tell you about work and family policy. This presentation is targeted at congressmen. These are the major topics covered in this presentation. Let's take a look at them one by one. First, I'll tell you the history of the pregnancy and childbirth. In 1890, the protective legislation passed in many states to limit the hours of work and the access to dangerous jobs for women. In 1921, the Shepard-Turner Act was enacted. This gave grants to states to provide health care for mothers and children regardless of economic status. However, this act was widely criticized as a socialist policy, therefore it was extinguished in 1929. In 1942, the Women's Bureau in Department of Labor recommended standards for the maternal health of employed women. Together, they recommended prenatal care, limited hours of work, rest periods, prenatal leave, and postnatal leave. However, the federal government and the states did not adopt these recommendations. In the 1950s, the Department of Labor included women as a potential source of national economic productivity. In other words, the federal government accepted women as a regular part of the workforce. In this background, in 1963, the Equal Pay Act, which abolished payment discrimination between men and women, was enacted. In the early 1960s, the Women's Bureau developed the concept of pregnancy as a temporary physical disability. This definition makes pregnancy equivalent to job-related disabilities that happen to men. Therefore, if leave for disability is a worker's right, then leave for pregnancy should be a worker's right as well. In 1978, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, so-called PDA, became law. The PDA was the first national policy in the U.S. for pregnant workers. PDA prohibits discrimination against pregnant women in all aspects of employment, including hiring, firing, job security, seniority, and fringe benefits. After PDA had been enacted, there were critics that PDA was rigidly equitable and gender neutral. People demanded their benefits beyond the PDA, such as maternity leave. From the 1970s to the 1980s, the influx of white mothers with children at home into the labor market increased rapidly, resulting in two sharply conflicting views on maternity leave. In consideration of women's two roles, Betty Friedan emphasized the need for maternity leave. On the other hand, reform feminists opposed any kind of special treatment approach. They argued that all policies must be gender neutral. In these conflicting opinions, the federal government did nothing, but some states enacted maternity leave statutes. Finally, in 1993, President Clinton signed the Family and Medical Leave Act, so-called FMLA, into law. This law provides up to 12 weeks job-protected unpaid leave for certain family and medical reasons, including pregnancy and childbirth. In 2010, the Obama administration issued an executive order to extend FMLA's reach to people who act as parents, such as same-sex partners and grandparents. Next, I'll tell you the history of the child care policy. In the mid-1800s, free public education was expanded. From the 1880s, community day nurseries to care the children of mothers who worked in the factories started. In 1930s, under the New Deal project, the federal government funded to non-school child care in the first. This fund was for providing jobs for unemployed teachers and nurses, rather than helping working mothers. In 1941, Congress enacted the Community Facilities Act, which allocated federal funds to provide daycare for children of workers in defense plants. That was an emergency war measure, so these federal funds were eliminated in 1946. In 1964, Head Start program was created. Head Start is a program that provides preschool education for low-income families. In 2017, there were 1 million children enrolled in Head Start. In 1971, President Nixon vetoed the Child Development Act. The Child Development Act was a bill to provide high levels of child care and development programs for all children regardless of income. President Nixon said that it was excessive government interference with the family and associated with communist systems. In 1974, Title 20 of the Social Security Act extended grants to states to fund daycare centers for low-income and moderate-income families. In 1988, the Family Support Act was enacted, which required states to provide child care service for people who were enrolled in a job training program. In 1990, Congress passed the Child Care and Development Block Grant, providing states with $750 million for child care service targeted at low-income families. This block grant had increased to $5.2 billion in 2014, and it's the primary source of child care assistance for the poor. So far, I have briefly talked about the history of policies. Now I'll explain the key policy strategies. First, key policy strategies of pregnancy and childbirth. Federal policy can be explained by two national policies, PDA and FMLA. The PDA prohibits discrimination against pregnant women in all aspects of employment, including hiring, firing, job security, seniority, and fringe benefits. However, PDA have limitations. It applies only to workers covered by Title VII. Therefore, only workers with 15 or more employees can be covered, leaving about 1 in 6 women unprotected. The FMLA is to provide maternity leave. This policy provides up to 12 weeks job-protected unpaid leave for certain family and medical reasons, including pregnancy and childbirth. However, this policy has some limitations. The leave is unpaid and applies to some workers with more than 50 employees. On the other hand, state and local policies are more generous and advanced than federal policies. To overcome the limitation of the PDA, 5 states require employers to have temporary disability insurance plans for their employees, and the plans give benefits for pregnancy. Also, about half the states have more generous maternity leave policy than FMLA. For example, women working in workplaces with fewer than 50 employees can use maternity leave. Also, a handful of states have mandated paid leave. Historically, if some states' policies were ahead of the federal government's policies, this caused conflict which eventually led to Supreme Court ruling and subsequent federal policy changes. Therefore, I expect that improvements in FMLA will be made in the future. Next, key policy strategy of childcare. Federal policies consist largely of funding and tax incentives. Based on many laws, the federal government provides funding to the states. This grant provides child care for certain groups such as low-income families. Also, the federal government benefits tax deductions for child care and tax credit for child care costs. In particular, a tax credit for child care costs relieves working parents of about 20% of the cost of care. State and local policies focus on the execution of federal funding, such as supporting on-site centers. Also, they developed various services such as providing information about childcare services available in a community. From now, let's take a look at key issues. There are several issues at each stage of pregnancy, childbirth, and childcare. First, in the pregnancy stage, there are several conflicting perspectives on pregnancy. Those who think that various supports for pregnant workers are necessary regard pregnancy as a temporary physical disability. They insist on various measures to protect pregnant women, such as limiting the hours of work and providing adequate maternity leave. On the other hand, those who think that special benefit for pregnant working women is unnecessary regard pregnancy as a natural function. They argue that pregnancy is private and usually voluntary. Therefore, they argue that it is unfair to the government for the government to intervene in this private area through funds and regulation. Historically, over time, court rulings Federal and state government legislation have been made in the direction of giving benefits for pregnant workers. Second, in the childbirth stage, the level of maternity leave is key issue. As mentioned earlier, the federal government provides up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave through FMLA to working women who give birth. By the way, would 12 weeks be appropriate to take care of a newborn? Also, quite a few countries mandate paid leave to women who give birth, but the US federal government still mandate unpaid leave. In addition, this leave is provided only to some workers with more than 50 employees. So women who work for small companies have to quit their jobs at the same time as they give birth. There are many criticisms of these limitations of maternity leave, and in fact, many states implement more advanced and generous maternity leave than FMLA. Historically, progressive states usually implemented such policies ahead of the federal government, and later the federal government enacted them. Therefore, I expect that improvement in maternity leave will be made in the near future. I think that key issue in childbirth stage is the supply-demand imbalance. In other words, there is a very large discrepancy between supply and demand for childcare support in the workplace. Looking at the demand, parents' childcare needs have been rising rapidly due to women's active participating in labor market and the increase in double-income couples. On the other hand, the supply of childcare is not enough. Federal funds are targeted at the poor rather than the middle class. Also, childcare support in the workplace has not caught up with the rapidly increasing demand. This imbalance in supply and demand for childcare in the workplace is causing many women to quit their jobs. Actually, according to a recent survey, 26% of women who became unemployed during the pandemic said it was due to a lack of childcare support in the workplace. So far, I have talked about the history of policies, key policy strategies, and key issues. Now I recommend two policy options. First, I think the FMLE needs to be improved. All I mentioned, current policy has limitations such as limited targets, unpaid leave, and insufficient period of caring newborn. Therefore, the federal government and Congress should consider expanding policy targets to workplaces with fewer than 50 employees. In order to reduce the burden on employers, the federal government should simultaneously devise support measures such as tax incentives. Also, unpaid leave should be changed to paid leave by legislation. Some states already provide half the regular wage for a certain period of time by funding from mandatory employee contributions. The federal government should consider applying this policy to all states. In addition, maternity leave should be extended to about a year, creating a foundation for mother workers to fully nurture newborns and return to work. Second recommendation is to develop various childcare support in the workplace. This can be a cost burden to employers. However, the retirement of female workers due to childcare leads to the cost of hiring and training new employees. Therefore, it's necessary to change the idea of looking at childcare support in the workplace as investment for productivity rather than high-cost welfare. There are many ways to support childcare that employers can do. Expanding on-site facilities can make parents feel that their children are safely protected near them. Linking with facilities in the community can reduce the burden on mother workers. For example, discount negotiation with nearby daycare centers, supporting childcare space by providing space and low cost can be good options. Partnership with nearby organizations enables the achievement of economic effects of scale by jointly providing childcare benefits. Offering flexible work schedule and remote work will greatly contribute to improving productivity of parents raising young children. If the federal, state, and local governments collect and promote success stories of childcare support in the workplace, many employers can refer to them and implement childcare support measures that can have a great effect at a low cost. Thank you very much for listening.